Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our heart be acceptable unto you, O Lord, Most High. Amen. You may be seated. It is interesting and a privilege to be able to stand and share with you for this first time the gospel message by way of this sermon. And on this very interesting topic that follows from the readings we have just listened to. As many of you know, Olive and I, our journeys have taken us from Dallas, Texas, many years ago, where we raised our children, through Los Angeles, California, to now Georgia, where we're now a part of this new family over here. So in a way, or in a sense, we're like the people of Israel. We have journeyed quite a bit around the United States. But God has been good and faithful in leading us every step of the way. And you know, that is what God delights to do for any and every one of His children. Lead us day by day. It doesn't matter what comes along the way, and things will come up. But the truth is that God will lead His children. And He wants us to learn that His desire, His intention for us is to go forward. So that's what exactly we see happening here in the story of the people of God and Israel in the Old Testament passage that we read today in Exodus 16. But before we delve a little bit more into it, remember that back in Exodus chapter 14, when they came before that Red Sea, the best of Pharaoh's army was right behind them. It was a frightening experience. They didn't know where to go or what to do. And they cried to Moses, and Moses cried to God. And what did God tell Moses? Tell the people to go forward. Exodus 14, verse 15. By the way, we have an outline, and everybody should have a copy of the outline. It's at the back desk. Can someone help us please distribute that? All right. You know how they say it's good to be on the same page, so that way we're going to be on the same page, right? All right. And I may not go through this outline word for word, but it will give us an idea of where we're going with this. And so, as you can see in the outline, the topic of this sermon is how to go forward with God and grow. And I believe with all my heart that this is God's intention for us, for all His children, all the time, just like it was for the people of Israel. When they were in front of that big dilemma right before the Red Sea, God said through Moses to the people, go forward. God wants us to go forward and to grow, just like He wants us to fellowship with Him. And we see what happened in the case of Enoch in Genesis 5:21 through 24. Enoch walked so closely to God. God loved it, and God kept him. Somebody said it this way, that Enoch walked with God, and he walked so far with God, he lost his way. He didn't know how to go back home. But God wants us to walk closely with Him. All right. And to do that, we need to learn. That's the point of this message. Otherwise, if we don't learn, because God wants us to go with Him, He wants to teach us. If we don't learn, what we end up doing, do what the people of Israel did, go around in circles. That's not God's will. So again, our text is from Exodus 16, verses 1 through 4, and 9 through 15. So from this passage, we see that the Israelites needed to learn at least How many things? 3 things in order to successfully move forward with God and grow in their relationship with Him. Do you see where I am? Okay. And so, as I said already, for us to move forward with God and grow, we must learn the same 3 things. And they are, number 1, God uses plans to help us move forward with Him and to grow. Plans. For example, God planned the path for the people of Israel. You remember that very well. As we mentioned there, instead of leading the people, God chose, He planned to lead them around by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, instead of leading them through the shortcut of the land of the Philistines. What would have happened if God had led them through that shortcut? They would have seen war, and they would have surely returned to Egypt, which they seem to have been wanting to do so bad. All right? Because the Philistines were seasoned soldiers, they were far advanced in technology at this time. Remember, the Israelites just left Egypt empty-handed, just about. They didn't have implements of war or the ability to work with iron like the Philistines were able to at this time. So it would have been no competition at all. The Philistines would have beaten them hands down. So God planned that route for them, right? And not that alone. Another example, God planned their protection. God defended them from war, from scorpions, from snakes. And God planned for their protection by providing the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. And when the Egyptians were pursuing them, that pillar provided a barrier between the Egyptians and the Israelites, as God then parted the Red Sea and His people went across. And you know, people have struggled with this over the years, and they say, no, it's just coincidence or accident. Well, the same accident that drowned all the Egyptians let the people of Israel go. Some other scholars say, you know, it was just the fact that they passed through a narrow part of the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. Actually, it wasn't a big deal. Okay, well, it wasn't a big deal. But the same narrow and shallow part, muddy part of the Sea of Reeds that they passed through successfully was deep and wide and difficult enough to drown the best of Pharaoh's chariots and soldiers. God was in it, and He planned it in this way. God also planned for the provision of water and food and shelter, and even their health care, better than Obamacare and Medicare and everything we have today. I tell you, you know, God has a plan for each and every one of us. We just have to discover what it is. We just have to see God's hand as He was working out this plan and His purposes for us day by day. So that way we'll joyfully follow Him. You see, the people of Israel, led by Miriam and Moses, they sang after they came out of Egypt. And that's what God really would have preferred that they kept doing along the way. But of course, that's not what we see them doing. They kept grumbling and grumbling. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more later. But God made these marvelous provisions. He planned it out so that His people will learn more and more about Him and grow in their fellowship with Him. And that's why I like that song that we prefaced this sermon with, the song about trusting the Lord and obeying Him. That's really what it is about, to be happy and joyful in the Lord and to grow in our fellowship and relationship with Him. Point number 2. God uses problems to help us move forward with Him and grow. And I've heard people ask, Pastor, but how come? How was a good God give us problems for us to grow. That is part of God's design. You might as well ask, but why does God allow that butterfly as it goes through that cocoon stage to first have to struggle before it breaks out, become a butterfly? Because that's part of what helps to make it beautiful and colorful. All right. So God sometimes uses problems. It's just one of the marvelous things that God has decided to bring about. So let's read that section. God uses problem, hunger. He used the problem of hunger to test the people, to teach them, so that they will learn to depend on God. Because I asked the question, yeah, how did God use the problem to test the people and to teach them? Because remember, he had just done the mighty miracle of letting them pass through the Red Sea, right? And just before that, too, in chapter 15, if you look at verses 22 to 26, you'll see what God had just done. They passed through a place where the water was bitter. They couldn't drink it. God made that bitter water to become sweet, and they could drink it. So they've been seeing God's hand. If we go back, you see how God delivered them when he unleashed the 10 plagues to Pharaoh and his people, and safeguarded the people of Israel. So God allowed these problems not to destroy his people, but to help them grow. Okay, if we're wondering why would God allow problems, why did he allow Jesus to go through hunger? Exactly what the people of Israel faced in the wilderness, Jesus also faced before he started his ministry. You remember that in Matthew chapter 5 and in Luke chapter 6. Jesus was tempted with hunger, which was what was the problem here, for which the people of God wanted to go back to Egypt. What did Jesus do when he was tempted with hunger? Instead of grumbling like, God, what is this the kind of work I'm going to be doing? I'm half dead with hunger. But instead of doing that, what did he do? He used the word of God. He trusted God and obeyed God. So the problem actually for the people of God here wasn't so much a problem of hunger as it was a heart problem. And that is what we need to guard against. Let me, talking about God using problems to help us move forward and grow in him. Please let me read for us this story. I think is pertinent to what we're talking about, from the chaplain of the United States Senate, Barry Black. Some of you probably know him or about him already. In the second chapter of his book, he says, my mother came home. He was raised by a single mother, by the way. My mother came home from her job as a maid one day with a bag in her hand. My siblings and I surrounded her, anticipating that she would reveal some goodies. The first thing she pulled out was a thick old record album. Leaving my siblings to discover the other treasures, I grabbed the album and ran out to our little record player to see what music would delight my 8-year-old ears. Instead of music, however, I discovered 2 melodious sermons by Peter Marshall, who was chaplain of the U.S. Senate from 1947 to 1949. At that time, not only did I not know who Peter Marshall was, I also didn't know the Senate had a chaplain. One thing I did know, Marshall's lyrical language mesmerized me. I played the recording so many times that it became scratchy. Having memorized those sermons, I recited entire paragraphs for my inner city friends, who enjoyed my imitation of Marshall's Scottish accent. I never dreamed I would one day stand where Peter Marshall stood as the 62nd chaplain of the U.S. Senate. But God had a plan for my life, and He gave me an early glimpse. Imagine the disappointment of an 8-year-old boy, excited that mommy brought home some goodies from work, and he sees an old record. But that's the beginning of the turning point in his life to where he is. And so God uses problems to grow us. We can multiply example upon example of this. Thirdly and lastly, God uses people to help us move forward with Him and to grow. We have examples, for example, Moses. God used Moses to lead them out of Egypt. God used Moses to communicate between them and God. And Aaron was Moses' assistant and partner. God used Paul to teach us a lot, like we saw in the history reading today. Certainly God used Jesus to teach you and I to move forward as we follow Him and grow in Him. And the beautiful part of what we're talking about, mentioning Jesus, one of the people that God used, and the perfect example that God uses to help us focus on Him, because He is the author and finisher of our faith. He's a big example. Is because Jesus has gone through all the problems that the people of Israel had gone through. In fact, He was with them every step of the way. Do we realize that? He was that manna that they ate. Because in the reading, I hope you listened, and it was intriguing to me as I was listening. When the manna fell, what did they call it? What is it? I want to scream at them and say, it is Jesus! Because in John chapter 6, that's precisely what Jesus told them. When they were saying, oh, our fathers ate the manna that Moses provided for them, Jesus said, it wasn't Moses who gave them that manna. It was my Father in heaven, and this is that bread from heaven. He identified Himself as that manna. He was the water that followed them. Jesus is our example. He will go with us every step of the way, and I believe He wants us to learn that. Not to focus on the problems like the people were doing, or to focus on the journey, but to focus on the goal, and who is going with us, and in fact He is already there before us at the finish line, waiting for us to get there. Let's not be like the people of Israel, who they will hear from one ear, who will go out the other ear. Pretty much like that's what their life was. Which reminds me of the story, another pastor of these three men. One was a doctor, the other one was a lawyer, and the other one was a preacher. They went deer hunting. And incidentally, all three of them shot the deer at the same time. And so there was an argument about who actually fired the shot that killed the deer. Arguing, they couldn't decide who actually did it. So, forest guard, someone who was there, came there, judge. He said, now help us to decide. You are an expert in the forest affairs. Who do you think fired the shot that killed this deer? So he said, I know, that's easy. He examined the deer and said, it was the pastor who fired that shot. He said, how do you know? He said, because the bullet went in one ear and went out the other ear. That's the people of Israel for us right there. Every sermon desires an action, a decision. What's our decision today? God always follows His people. God always wants His people to grow and be steadfast, unmovable. What must we do to go forward and to grow? What must we do with Jesus who is following us through all the ups and downs of this life? What must we do with this loving Jesus? There is not a friend like the Lord Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. Let's conclude with that.